In previous episodes, we have created programs where we can interact with circles and rectangles, but always one at a time. This time, let's make a program where we can interact with maybe 50 rectangles. So let's start here the program by typing int amount. I'm going to say AMT. It's going to be 50. So this is how many rectangles we're going to have. Now we're going to have to use arrays to store all the information. Before we could just type here int x1, int x2, int y1, and int y2, for example, to define the position of one rectangle. But since we're going to have now a collection of rectangles, we have to make this an array. So we have to add here square brackets after the int, after the type. And I'm going to make this equal to new int, and here I will specify AMT. I could say here 50, but it's a good idea to use a variable for this to make it easier to change the program. Imagine then I want 60 rectangles, then I have to come here and type 60 on every line. But if I type here AMT and AMT, I just have to change it in one place up here. So I'm gonna repeat this, new int AMT, and here new int AMT. I am also going to create an array where I can store the color of each rectangle. And this is not going to be an integer, but it's going to be a color array. So color array C, I'm going to call it C. And this is new color AMT. So you can see that in this case, instead of integer, I'm using color to define the type. Now let's create here the setup and the draw function. And let's specify some size, like 400 times 300. Color mode HSB. I will say HSB, 100. So the values I enter inside the color function are numbers between 0 and 100. Now let's set here the rect mode to corners to make it easier to calculate if the mouse is inside the rectangle or not. And I'm going to add one more global variable here called bgcolor. This is going to be a color variable where I will store a random background color. I don't have to define the variable here. I can do this on the setup. Here I will say bgcolor is color random 100 30 30. Let's make it dark and not very saturated. Let's try if everything is working for now. And it looks like there are no errors, so everything is going fine. Now, when the program starts, here in the setup, we could define where do we want our rectangles. So we can go through each of these 50 rectangles and define all the x1, x2, y1, y2, and the color of all those rectangles. Let's make here a for loop. Int I is 0, while I is less than AMT, which means 50 at the moment. Then we increase I. And here we have to define now x1, x2, y1, y2, and the C, the color variable. Remember, these are arrays, so we have to specify which item do we want to update. So I'm going to say here square brackets I. This is going to mean the first x1, the second x1, the third x1, all the way up to 49. And we have to do the same for x2. And the same for y1, y2, and for C. So we have these 5 variables. We have to give them now some values. So what's a good value for x1? We could say it's any point on the screen, any horizontal position. So I'm going to say here int random width. So it's a random number between 0 and the width of the screen. And I'm converting it into an integer because I specified up here that they are arrays of integer values. I could do the same here with x2. I could say int random width. But there's one thing I don't like, and is that maybe x2 would be to the left of x1, which is a little bit odd. And another thing I don't like is that I cannot define the width. Maybe some rectangles would be very large, and maybe the width of some of the rectangles would be just 1 pixel, because if here I get, for example, a number like 200 and here a number like 201, then this rectangle will be almost invisible. So instead of just giving it a totally random value, what I'm going to do is I'm going to base x2 on x1. I'm going to say x2 of I is x1 of I. For example, if here I had 200, then now I'm saying that x2 is 200 plus a random value. For example, a number between 20 and 100. And I'm going to make this again an integer. So what this does is moving to the right a certain amount of pixels, a number between 20 and 100. So what I'm doing is basically defining the width of the rectangles. The rectangles are going to be something between 20 and 100. Now let's repeat the same for the y variable. Int random height. So it's a random number between 0 and the height of the screen. And here I'm going to do the same trick again. I'm going to say y2 is y1 of I. So that's whatever random number I got here on the previous line, plus integer random 20, 100. So the height of the rectangles is going to be something between 20 and 100. And now the color is going to be a little bit different. We have to define here a color with a random hue. So I'm going to say random 100, and I'm going to say that the saturation and the brightness is higher than in the background. This was just 30-30. Here I prefer brighter colors. So there it is. Now I have defined all the positions and colors for our rectangles. Now what I should do is to draw all of these rectangles each time draw is called. So I have to repeat this for loop. I can just copy it from here. I'm gonna copy and paste here the same loop where I go from 0 to 50. And I'm missing here a curly brace. And now I have to set a fill color and I have to draw a rectangle. The fill color is going to be C of I. This is the variable where I have stored here the color, a random color for this specific rectangle. So rectangle 0 might have one color and rectangle 1 might have a different color. Same thing here with the x and y values for my rectangle. So I'm going to say here x1 of I, here goes y1 of I, x2 of I, and y2 of I. So I think this should draw my collection of rectangles. Let's see that. And there it is. There are some things I'm not doing. I'm not using the background color. You can see it's the default gray. And I'm having these black borders, which I don't want to have. So I'm going to get rid of the black borders here, no stroke. And then inside the draw, before drawing anything, I'm going to call background and my variable bg color. So now it's not going to be gray anymore. And there it is. Now I have all my rectangles there on the screen. Let's see on the next episode how we can detect if the mouse is inside each of these rectangles. Maybe we could show some border when the mouse is inside, and maybe if we click, we can make the rectangle jump somewhere else on the screen.